The mockery started before he'd even crossed the revolving doors quick. Careless snorts of laughter that bounced off the marble floor like they owned the place. A few heads turned, not out of curiosity, but the slow, judging kind of glance people give to something that doesn't fit. His work jacket gave it away instantly, faded gray, pressed carefully but frayed at the cuffs. His boots polished enough to shine but old enough to show it. He stopped just inside the entrance, one hand tightening around the strap of his worn canvas bag, steadying himself against something far heavier than the bag itself. Inside that building, influence moved like a current, quiet, invisible, and impossible to ignore if you weren't part of it. Today, he looked like the last person who belonged there. He walked in anyway. Before we go further, if you believe in second chances, in stories that remind us not to judge too fast, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more. These stories matter more than entertainment. They remind us who we are and who we can still become. Every footstep across that lobby felt too loud, too out of place among the tailored suits and unhurried confidence of the people around him, most of whom didn't spare him a glance. A few did, some with puzzled looks, others barely hiding their amusement. Then there was the man by the elevators, silver-haired, dressed in something that probably cost more than a month's rent for most people, surrounded by a small crowd, hanging on his words. His smile didn't carry warmth, it carried appraisal. His gaze landed on the jacket first, then moved up slowly like he was weighing something beneath his notice. The smirk that followed wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It spread through the group around him, a few quiet laughs, a couple of exchanged glances. Cruelty doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just settles into a room. The man in the work jacket noticed. Of course he did. He didn't react. He straightened his sleeve, kept his pace steady, and walked on. There was no anger on his face, no embarrassment either, just something quieter. The kind of calm you only earn by surviving worse, because this wasn't new to him. 4 years earlier, things had looked different. Not easy, but steady. A small apartment, a reliable paycheck, and a reason to smile every time he opened the front door. His son would barrel into him before he'd even taken his shoes off. His partner had been the steady center of it, all the person who made ordinary days feel secure. Then, over the course of one brutal season, all of it came apart. Illness doesn't wait for a convenient time. It doesn't ask, it just takes. By the time the medical bills stopped arriving, so had any sense of certainty. He'd sold what he could, picked up whatever work was available, and learned how to make one day's wages cover two. The jacket he wore now wasn't a uniform of status. It was what kept the lights on. Every morning he was up before the sun, making breakfast, getting his son ready for school, walking him there with a smile that hid how tired he really was. Then came his shift-long hours, little recognition, the kind of work that makes a person disappear from view while becoming essential to everyone who depends on him. And today, all of that had led him here, not by chance. The letter had arrived a week earlier, formal, unexpected, almost impossible to believe. A request for his presence at a private strategy meeting. No explanation, just a date, an address, and his name spelled correctly. He'd read it 3 times before he trusted it. Now, standing in the middle of that building, he felt the gap between who he used to be and who he appeared to be more sharply than he had in years. The silver-haired man turned to someone beside him, murmured something, and another ripple of quiet laughter followed. The words didn't matter. The meaning was obvious enough. Still, he kept walking. He reached the elevator. The doors slid open. Inside, the air felt different, quieter, denser, untouched by the noise outside. As the doors closed, his reflection looked back at him from the polished walls. Tired eyes, a steady jaw, a man with nothing left to prove to anyone, except, maybe, to himself. The elevator rose, floor by floor, each one further from the world he'd walked in from. His posture never changed. His breathing stayed even, because this wasn't about where he'd been. It was about what it had cost him to get here. When the doors opened again, the silence was immediate. This floor was different. No chatter, no rush, just a long hallway ending in a set of closed double doors. He stepped out and approached them. Something in the air shifted inside the boardroom. Everything was already in place, seats filled, documents laid out, a low hum of anticipation. They weren't waiting for just anyone. They were waiting for him. The doors opened, and what happened next, no one outside that room would have predicted. Every person at that table stood, not slowly, not out of politeness. Immediately, the kind of respect that isn't performed, only shown. The room changed shape around him. The same man who'd been quietly laughed at downstairs now stood at the center of something else entirely. Recognition replaced judgment. The eyes that might have skipped past him anywhere else now held nothing but acknowledgement, because they knew what the jacket had hidden. Years before hardship had rewritten his life, he'd been something else entirely, an operations strategist whose decisions had quietly reshaped 3 companies without his name ever making the headlines. He'd walked away from all of it not from failure, but from love, to be there for the people who needed him most. And when everything collapsed, he never asked for his old seat back. He rebuilt from nothing. This invitation wasn't a favor, it was recognition, because the people in that room understood exactly what he was worth, even after everything. The meeting that followed wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about picking up where he'd left off. Every point he raised carried the weight of hard-won experience. The room listened, not for who he used to be, but for who he still was. Downstairs, the silver-haired man had no idea that the person he'd dismissed with a glance was, at that very moment, being welcomed with a kind of respect no amount of money could buy. No idea that real influence doesn't always come dressed the way you expect. Sometimes it looks like someone who refused to quit. When the meeting ended, there was no applause, no big gesture, just a quiet, mutual understanding that respect had been restored, not given for the first time. He left the way he'd come in, calm, unhurried, but something had shifted, not in him, in how the room now saw him. Crossing the lobby again, the same marble floor reflected something different this time. Same jacket, same worn boots, but the silence around him now carried a different weight. Recognition arriving too late to matter to the person who owed it. The silver-haired man noticed him again. No smirk this time, no laughter. Just a brief pause, a flicker of understanding that had come a beat too late. Because respect, once withheld, doesn't always get a second invitation. He didn't stop walking. Outside, the daylight felt lighter somehow, not because the world had changed, but because it had finally caught up to what he'd known about himself all along. He still had a son waiting for him at home, still had bills, still had long shifts ahead, still had a life built on sacrifice, not status. But something else had come back to him too, a second chance. And as he walked away from that building, he didn't need to look back, because the biggest wins in life are rarely loud. They're quiet, hard-earned, and impossible to take away. If this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you not to judge people by what you see on the surface, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated or watched someone else get judged unfairly? Your story matters too, because in the end, the world will always try to define people by what's visible: their clothes, their circumstances, their current chapter. But real strength doesn't announce itself. It's built quietly through the moments no one else ever sees.